Symposium with Aulak.
Hi guys, welcome back to the Symposium. Today I'm really happy again to be starting a brand new series, this time on Formula One. We'll be speaking to our two guests, be asking them about how they got into the sport, what are their fondest memories, what they thought of last season, the 2019 season, and what their thoughts are ahead of the rest of the Grand Prix in the shortened 2020 season, and some of their initial reactions to the Grand Prix from a couple of weeks ago and the overall start to the season. Without further ado, I'm delighted to introduce the guests. We have Lawrence, who you will know from the Football Pod and Future Cricket Pod. Lawrence?
Hi guys, excited to start this new series with you. It should be a good one. F1's a big passion of mine.
No, it's always good to hear. And my friend Zack, who is a brand new addition to the Symposium. We're delighted to have him. He's a massive F1 fan as well. Yeah, Zack, how are you?
Very good. Thank you for having me on. It's great. I've listened to some of your other podcasts, and it's really great to be a part of what you're doing. It's brilliant.
Thank you very much. No, honestly, thanks to you. Thanks to great friends like yourself to have gotten involved, spending the time to talk about topics that interest them. You know, that's what keeps us going. So thank you to both of you. I guess just start off with you then, Zack. So how did you get into Formula One? What are some of your fondest memories? What's the first race you remember watching?
Well, how I got into Formula One, I just started watching it. There's nothing exciting, unfortunately. I wish there was. I wish I could say there was some great story of how I got into the sport, but no, I just started watching it on television. First race I remember watching completely, I think, was Abu Dhabi 2010. So it was the title decider. And my goodness, it did not disappoint with all the drama going on there with Petrov and Alonso being and Webber, all that argument. So off the track at the end with Alonso waving his hands at Petrov. But yes, that was my first race. In terms of memories,
is that Vettel crying on the podium?
Well, Vettel crying on the podium as well.
It's classic. I remember that now.
Yeah, Vettel crying on the podium, but that was. I'll be honest. That was just sort of what I was expecting. You know, if you win something, guys go their whole lives.
That's just the image. That's just the image that stands out to me from that race, I think.
Yeah, and definitely the team radio where he's where they shout "You are world champion" through the radio. I mean that was pretty special. That will be something that I think a lot of F1 fans who watch that race will never forget, for sure.
Yeah. So Abu Dhabi 2010. Lawrence, what about you? How did you get into F1? What's the first race you remember watching yourself?
Honestly, I really don't remember when my first race was. The reason why is that I do remember I have like really early memories of watching ITV in like the mid 2000s with my dad. And I was quite young then. A young kid, so I don't really remember exactly which first race that I watched. But what I do remember was my dad being a huge Ferrari fan, and just, Schumacher was my dad's, well, not hero, but, the one he was cheering for. I guess I really probably started watching in 2007. And obviously that was when Kimi Räikkönen won his first and only F1 title, unless, next season he pulls out a mad one with Alpha. But yeah, that season was really fantastic for me. Really enjoyed the 2007 European Grand Prix with all that crazy rain.
Yes.
Van something, I don't remember his name. Anyway, a back marker leading the field after like two Winkelhock, yeah, that's leading the race after like 2 laps. That was one that really stood out to me.
Yeah, I mean that's eerily similar to how I started. So to offer my contribution, I remember watching F1 like you, Lawrence, in the mid 2000s with my dad, with the ITV. And for some reason they used to have breaks in the middle of races. I remember, I'm not sure why, but yeah, I remember watching that with the adverts in the races and my dad getting frustrated at the adverts. And then, I think the first race I watched properly was Canada 2007. I think that was Lewis Hamilton's happened to be Lewis Hamilton's first Grand Prix win as well. And yeah, ever since then I've kind of rooted for Hamilton just quite naturally, I guess, from a British perspective. Though, I've got, I'd say I'm now more of a McLaren fan than a Hamilton fan, but we'll probably get to that later. But yeah, I mean, I think that's the first race I remember watching. I do kind of have some memories of Alonso winning the title in 2000, and I think it was 2006. I think that was his second title, because I remember my dad was just, saying it was quite a momentous time because Schumacher had obviously won 5 in a row from 2000 to 2004. So Alonso managing to win 2 in a row was considered quite the achievement. But yeah, I think that's my first memory. But yeah, Zack, what are some of your best memories then? So you started watching in 2010, end of 2010 season with Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. So you've been watching for about a decade. So from this decade, what are some of the memories that really stand out to you from the sport?
Well, it's quite a long list, unfortunately, so I'll keep it brief on that one, relatively brief, I should say. I think the best race probably of sort of the early 2010s for me, I mean, people will probably disagree with this, but actually I thought Silverstone 2014 was quite something, because we saw a lot of drama on the opening lap. We saw that red flag from the massive accident that Kimi had, damaging the barrier. We saw how it really built up this tension, because Lewis needed to win the race really to keep his championship going, and it was just the way he came up through the field, the way that Rosberg tried to keep up in terms of the pace, and then his car broke down before they could actually race. It was all the hallmarks of the rivalry that we ended up seeing with Hamilton and Rosberg. So I think people will probably disagree with that one, because there are definitely better races, but that one was probably the best memory I have, and I think is one of the best. The other one being for me being the German Grand Prix in 2018, and I was at that race. I was at the Sachs curve where Vettel crashed out. I think that was probably one of the best as well.
That's crazy. That's absolutely crazy, man.
Yeah, it was perfect luck. I think part of the reason that was such a big thing as well, it was his home race, but also that was probably the beginning of the end of his Ferrari career, and depending on the next few weeks, maybe even his career. It was at that point where Lewis had got inside Sebastian's head, and he couldn't really do anything about it. That was
prior to exactly, and it was prior to kind of all these other instances we've had since of Vettel perhaps losing his temper, crashing into people, but in a far less successful manner than his German precursor Michael Schumacher did. And yeah, I mean that's bold, but I think it's quite fair to say that was almost the beginning of the end of his Ferrari career. And yeah, I remember you saying to me actually at the time that you saw, some kind of negative things in the crowd, and the atmosphere was quite febrile, and it was quite a momentous time to be there when Vettel crashed out, because the home crowd were certainly not happy that Hamilton was successful in the wake of Vettel's error.
No, there was a huge hatred of Lewis, and I'm afraid to say there might have been some racial elements in that, because I certainly got the impression it was not just because he was a British driver or because he was Vettel's competitor. Yeah. Because I was at Silverstone as well 2 weeks earlier, so I could compare how the crowds were reacting to Sebastian versus Lewis, because they won each other's home races. And unfortunately, I got that impression, and it sort of was almost an element of justice in a way, that actually Lewis was able to really show, well, okay, you can fire abuse at me however you want, I'll still beat your guy. But it was just interesting seeing how the crowd did react, because there were a lot of Verstappen fans there as well, and they have a history with Vettel as well.
Yes.
And they were cheering as well, and most of the cheering you could hear when on the TV when that accident happened wasn't the British fans. There were not very many there. It was the Verstappen fans.
Yeah.
Orange flares going off, flags being waved, because even though Max was probably not going to win the race, at least he's beaten Vettel.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And yeah, I remember, I mean, just on the topic of kind of home Grand Prix, when was it that Hamilton made that very, amusing comment about Rosberg, where he said he's not actually German or something? And I just remember reading that. It was quite amusing.
I don't think I can remember that off the top of my head. That's probably 2014, 2015.
Something like that, around then.
Going.
Yeah. Lawrence, what about your memories? So Zach there mentioned 2014 British Grand Prix. I mean, to me in that season, I think I remember Bahrain for obvious reasons because that was, a quality race between the Mercedes, who were just way out ahead of everyone else. That's one of the most successful single season cars in history. Yeah. Well, what memories stand out to you? Because you've obviously been watching for, well, no, 13 years now. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'll just quickly move through my sort
No,
of
no,
F1
yeah,
watching.
yeah.
But yeah, the 2008 Brazilian Grand Prix
Oh, yeah, obviously.
was really sad for me, because okay, I mean, I might talk about Hamilton later, but I don't like him as a person. Sorry, just to bring that up. And yeah, seeing Felipe Massa's the dramatic change from joy because they thought they'd won the title to
Yeah.
complete sadness. I was really quite upset as what would I have been, like
You're
a
a Ferrari fan, I suppose.
9 or 10 year old Ferrari fan. Just
Yeah.
couldn't. Just yeah, it was I mean, obviously that was an amazing race, and Hamilton got all the plaudits. Oh yeah, is that Glock? I mean, but from a Ferrari's perspective, it wasn't good. Um, I guess from the 2010s, um, Ferrari were competitive in spells. 2012 was a great season for me, just sort of watching the Grand Prix because of purely the excitement. The 2012 European Grand Prix at Valencia, that was a great Alonso winning on his home turf at last. That was a great race as well. Maldonado hoofing off Hamilton in the last lap. That was very fun. Um, in the hybrid era, I guess the best memories I have are actually Red Bull victories. Like Daniel Ricciardo is a very charismatic driver, very enjoyable to watch, and whenever he wins a race, it seems to be completely crazy. Like the 2018 Chinese Grand Prix, that was fantastic. Do you remember his overtake on Bottas?
Yes.
That was
Yes.
that was really nail biting. Really enjoyed that. Yeah. Obviously we can't not mention the 2011 Canadian Grand Prix. I mean, if you're looking for a complete masterclass in changeable conditions, Jenson Button. And that was a fantastic race. I would watch that race over and over again, as I have done.
Yeah.
Um,
I
but
remember
yeah,
staying up. I remember staying up to watch it. I think it was 2011 Canada. And I remember that was actually a really good race, not only because you saw Button coming through the field and Vettel choking, but I remember there was a really close thing, I think between Kobayashi as well, and it was like on the line kind of photo finish. That was a thrilling race, as you say. I mean, do both of you are your memories more concentrated in the hybrid era, or the pre-hybrid era?
Well, for me, yes, ever so slightly, but that's
In
more,
the hybrid era.
it's more in the
Okay.
hybrid era for me, but that's partly just because of when I started watching. I mean, by the time I really understood the sport properly, it probably had been about 3 or 4 years of really watching it and immersing myself in the sport. So yeah, from
Yeah.
my side, yeah.
Fair enough. What about you, Lawrence?
well, yeah, I think I have to agree just purely because I was quite young during the late 2000s, and also I think that just generally the TV coverage of F1 has gotten much better over the past 6 or 7 years with Sky Sports. It becomes more memorable because I guess like I guess because the coverage is better. I don't know if I'm making much sense, but Martin Brundle is a fantastic co-commentator, and he really helps you understand races, and
Yeah.
he provides great insights, and I don't know, it just becomes more memorable that way. But maybe just because I have a short-term memory, I just
No,
remember the hybrid a bit better.
no, I think fair enough. I mean, for me, in terms of the TV coverage, I always kind of liked Sky's coverage. I had nostalgia. do have nostalgia for the kind of BBC coverage with Jake Humphries and Eddie and David Coulthard, etc. And you have Martin Brundle on commentary there as well. And I remember even ITV, you had Jonathan Ledyard and Martin Brundle, and I thought they were quite good together. But ITV kind of butchered the race with adverts, which kind of made it less desirable to watch. But yeah, no, thank you for supplying some of those memories. I think I just agree. I think 2014 Bahrain was a brilliant Grand Prix. I think, as you say, obviously, Lawrence, everyone kind of likes Canada 2011. That's quite iconic now. But yeah, no, I think those are all really good choices. Then kind of moving on to last season, what do you think is the kind of most interesting take that you have? Because obviously you can come and just say, Hamilton, as usual, kind of maintained his supremacy at the top. But what do you think was an interesting and unexpected kind of event that you saw last year, Zack?
Well, I think it's. I'm gonna sound like I'm having a go at Sebastian Vettel here. I really don't mean to. He's a nice guy outside the track, but actually, it's more of Sebastian's fall from grace, really. That's what really stood out for me, and I'd argue that it was 2019 where he really showed that he's not worth the money Ferrari were paying him, which is why they dropped him for 2021. Because he was outperformed by Charles, 2 victories to 1, and even then, Sebastian's only victory in Singapore, you could argue, was a slightly manufactured one because of the strategy. But even in Canada, when everyone was saying he should have won the race, well, if he'd have put his head down and tried to get the 5 seconds rather than ranting on the team radio, he might have won the race.
Yeah.
You can put in Italy and Brazil as well, where he crashed or was involved in accidents. And it's just, for me, that's what stood out the most. It's the world champion really starting to struggle. And yeah, I don't want to sound like I'm attacking Vettel only. Of course, he's got a lot of great things he's done. I think we need to remember he's a 4-time world champion for a reason. But 2019, it was definitely the fall from grace, I think, for Sebastian Vettel, continuing on from the end of 2018.
I mean, just I'll branch out from that briefly. Do you think it was there for a mistake for him to leave Red Bull when he did? Or do you think it was inevitable they'd have this decline simply because Mercedes had the superior machine in the hybrid era?
Well, I think with Daniel Ricciardo being the up-and-coming lad at Red Bull at the time, I think it was always going to happen. I'll be honest, I thought it was going to happen in 2015. It was at the end of 2015.
Right.
But yeah, I don't think it was a mistake. I think Ferrari at the time was the right place to be. But I think maybe he's just been a bit unlucky because I don't think he'd ever have really had a shot at the Mercedes seat. I don't think he will ever have a realistic shot at the Mercedes seat either.
No, fair enough. Lawrence, what about you?
Well, yeah, just continue on Ferrari. I mean, it's interesting that, well, at the time in 2014, Vettel was kind of pushed out of the team because Daniel Ricciardo outperformed him. And then in 2019, after 4 years of Kimi Räikkönen being a second driver to him, Leclerc comes in, and despite initially we had this team orders, like I remember in China, Leclerc having to run like a really long stint to help Vettel's race. Like, eventually Ferrari realized, Leclerc was just on better form, and like this whole 1-2 driver thing just wouldn't work between the two. And it seems like once again, Vettel, having been put under pressure by a teammate, is kind of folded, I guess. And he will be leaving the team because Leclerc is clearly the team leader now, and will lead the team in like setup and race strategy. Something also interesting from last season, I feel like, was the rise and fall of Valtteri 2.0. I reckon that Valtteri will have seen this season as like a great opportunity without like a proper Ferrari challenge to win a title. But in the first 4 races he won 2 of them. But then, like, Hamilton just went on a fantastic winning streak in the midway through the season. And, Valtteri just kind of fell away. And I think even in the first races of this season, as we'll go on to say, like, it's quite clear that Hamilton has something over not just Valtteri, but the rest of the field.
I mean, I don't want to be just like a Hamilton fan club because obviously it isn't. As Lawrence said, he's not Hamilton's biggest fan, but I think it would be remiss of us to not fully just appreciate his greatness, because I just remember that after the 2008 season, when he obviously won the championship, McLaren had a pretty awful car in 2009, and even in 2009 he managed to win the Hungarian Grand Prix. So I think that means that he's won a Grand Prix every single year of his career, which is ridiculous when you think about it, especially when some of the cars that he's had at McLaren other than 2007, 2008, some of the cars were nowhere near as close to some of the Red Bull cars. And yeah, I think it's important to kind of recognize that. So does anyone stand out to you from the kind of midfield? Any kind of specific Grand Prix that stood out to you, Zack, from last year?
Midfielders, that's an interesting one. I'd probably say it's Carlos Sainz. When we saw what he did in Brazil, coming from the back, having had engine penalties to get on the podium. Okay,
yeah.
Penalties involved, but that's the sport. That's how it works. He consistently did that, though. When you look at Hungary, he really drove a brilliant race there to finish. I think it was 5th, was it? I should have checked that. He was really high up. And you think this is a team that only 2 or 3 years earlier was at the back. The way he has driven, he has shown that he can be a fast, consistent driver, and that's why he's got the Ferrari seat for next year. So, yeah, I would say of the midfield lot, probably Carlos Sainz.
Fair enough. No, that's fair, because it's always nice to see when McLaren do well, and it was a nice surprise last year considering how awful they'd been in the kind of Honda era prior to that. Lawrence, what are your thoughts? What Grand Prix stood out to you? Anyone in the midfield that surprised you with their performances?
It's not strictly the midfield, but I think it's worth noting the Red Bull Toro Rosso dynamic. I feel like being Max Verstappen's teammate is such like a curse, because it's so difficult to be faster than him. Pierre Gasly getting booted out of Red Bull after I think 8 or 9 races.
Is Albon markedly better for you?
No, not 8 or 9. But as in, it's too early to tell, is what I'm saying.
Right.
But I mean, Red Bull seem to be sort of, churning drivers in and out, with alarming speed. Right now Alex Albon's confidence looks shot. And I just hope that Red Bull, give him some more time. I think there's been a lot of rumours about Vettel to Aston Martin, but Sergio Perez, because I don't think Stroll's father will kick out his own son from F1. If Perez were to leave, I mean, he's shown, last season, and this season and the season, he's just been a consistently great driver in the midfield over, I guess the 2010s. And it would be such a shame to see him leave the sport, because if Vettel were to move to Aston Martin.
I mean, you could say the same thing about kind of Nico Hülkenberg. He was one person that I know Christian Horner was always a massive fan of, and he's someone that always commanded respect. He's very obviously kind of racer. He's just never been really been fortunate with the kind of car he's been given. I think that's an example of something that's a shame. I guess the question then extends is more broadly, judging from last season and just more broadly, I guess, how important do you think the kind of car is to the performance of the driver? In that we've seen Hamilton, as just an example, pull out brilliant performances when his car's been shoddy. But it seems the norm that the cars generally fall into the race generally falls into the positions of whichever car is kind of best. Do you think we should look to the future to maybe remove constructors or remove the differences and make it more kind of driver focused, Zack?
Well, there's an argument for that, isn't there? My only concern with it would be, do we then end up with just a glorified version of Formula 2, which is a single mate championship?
Yeah.
Formula 2 is, I'd argue, a bit more exciting than Formula 1 at the moment, but I think that probably has its own difficulties. And I think maybe the now 2022 regulations probably fix a lot of those issues and hopefully mean that we can get drivers being where they are on merit and not because they've got a great engine or a great car or a great great chassis, however you want to look at it. But yeah, I wouldn't necessarily go that far.
No, okay, fair enough. No, and I'm sure in another episode or maybe at the end of this one we'll engage a bit more with potential ways to reform F1 and the 2022 regulations. Lawrence, what are your thoughts on this issue?
Well, I think the great attraction of F1 is that it is the fastest and most advanced, technologically speaking, motor racing series. The fact that we have quite a lot of flexibility, not too much as Ferrari have found out, means that teams can compete to build the fastest car. And that to me is one of the great attractions to F1. That's why I don't think we should move towards a single spec car. There is still great indicators of driving talent, right? Like the first is obviously between your teammate. Like if you can outperform your teammate, it generally means that you're a better driver than he is, and that helps us as viewers, as audience, as teams figure out who are the better drivers. If Hamilton consistently beats Bottas every single year, we know he's a better driver.
Yeah.
And people can still stand out in worse cars. Lando Norris has been fantastic this season.
I mean, even George Russell, I think
Yeah,
people
exactly.
can clearly see that he's a decent driver, even though his tools that he's been given aren't up there.
Exactly, and the fact that we have a pecking order means that drivers have things to play for all the time. Like, even if I'm in a midfield team or a lower team, like George Russell, if I drive well, I might get the Mercedes seat. Lamau, not for a while, but
Maybe.
it's something to strive for. Like, Sainz is getting his reward for consistently good performances in a Toro Rosso and McLaren with a move to I want to say top team, but
Whatever Ferrari are now.
yeah,
Fair enough.
but you know what I mean.
Well, that leads us very nicely then onto a kind of preview for this year. So, what did you make of the first couple of races, Zach? And how do you see this year panning out? What are your predictions?
I thought they were great races, actually. I know I was just saying that Formula 1 is maybe a bit more boring compared to Formula 2, but actually that's not to say that this season's necessarily been that bad. I think what's been interesting is to see that Bottas is almost making the same mistakes as last year, and that he's starting really strong, but he's not keeping it up. We should have seen this in the Styrian Grand Prix, and we should have seen this in Hungary as well. But I think it's closer partly because we've had rule stability by and large between the years now. My big prediction is probably that we are going to see Lewis as champion. That's probably not really a big prediction. We can probably all see that now. But I think we're going to possibly see a couple of teams having to make some big overhauls at the end of this season, particularly Haas and Alfa Romeo. I think we're going to see some big changes there.
No. Fair enough. I mean, do you speculate about the kind of personnel involved, or?
Yeah, so I think with Haas, I think we're probably going to see a complete overhaul if they stay. I think it's that they will probably try and either tie up with a manufacturer other than Ferrari and become independent, maybe with some American manufacturers, or they will try and get even closer to Ferrari, and they might even say, can we have two of your upcoming FDA stars, so Callum Ilott, Robert Schwartzman, Marcus Armstrong, Mick Schumacher potentially. And really, I think they need to do that because Grosjean and Magnussen, it was okay for a time, but the recent results, even with Magnussen getting in the points in Hungary, I just don't think they are particularly good enough. And I don't see why Gene Haas would want to keep investing when there isn't really the performance to back it up. If they overhaul the drivers, maybe they'll get some luck with some new, fresh talent.
No, I think that's fair enough. And I mean, it's just, I don't know, it's slightly sad just because then Haas will become a kind of worse version of Racing Point in the same way that Ferrari is a worse version of Mercedes. But yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. I think it's interesting. I've heard murmurs about Audi. Any kind of credence to those rumors, or Porsche, the Volkswagen Group in some form anyway?
I think Porsche would make more sense than Audi. I mean, they're part of the same. They're part of the same sort of clique of high-end German.
Well, they're all both Volkswagen, aren't they?
Yeah, I think I know that. Yeah, Porsche is definitely a Volkswagen brand. I would say Porsche is probably the more likely of the two because they are dabbling around with all the different sports at the moment. They are in Formula E, but at the same time, they are going to probably keep one combustion engine car in their road car lineup, and that's probably going to be the 911. And it makes sense at the same time to let's use a motorsport category to improve the technology within the 911, especially because they're going to have to make it more fuel efficient anyway, because no one will buy it because of taxes. So I would see Porsche getting involved with Haas for sure. I just think that at the same time, why would Haas want to take the risk of going with Porsche, who haven't made a Formula 1 engine in decades, when they could just try and cozy up more to Ferrari And at least that Ferrari's engine might not be particularly good this year, but it's still going to be better than anything Porsche will do for a couple of years, because Porsche will need to come in from scratch.
I guess maybe the alternative would be Porsche coming in as a works team, just as kind of Mercedes are in or Ferrari.
Possibly, but I think for Mercedes it makes more sense to be in Formula One, because if you look at their road lineup of vehicles you can buy, there will be some of those that will never really be electric. Whereas a lot of the Porsche cars, like the sports cars, for example, you could see those being electric, because people won't drive long enough distances to make electric cars completely impractical. The exception being the 911, which is their fun car. So I think it's possible, but I think Haas need to really get closer to Ferrari and not depend upon another manufacturer like Porsche. They could, and it would make sense, but that should not be their first option, for sure.
No. Fair enough. No, thank you. That's interesting, and I'm sure the listeners value your kind of road car knowledge as well. The new GT3 RS, I think, is out recently, but it was kind of scuppered by the pandemic in terms of its reveal. But I'd be interested to look at some reviews of that when they finally come around. Lawrence, what are your kind of thoughts then coming up for this season in terms of personnel changes? What are your thoughts on the championship, constructors?
Well, just going quickly to the Haas discussion. I mean, Haas is a very important team for F1, I think, because especially for Liberty Media, the American owners of F1, they want to expand the brand to make it not so Eurocentric, and Haas is like a big part of that as the only American team. So I think they'll work very hard to keep Haas in the sport. Let's move to this season. I think there's been a few interesting talking points from the front. Valtteri Bottas, Zack, you talked about him making a lot of the same mistakes. I think it's important to recognize. I mean, the 2020 Hungarian Grand Prix in qualifying, Bottas put in a fantastic lap in Q3. Honestly, if I watched it through, I couldn't find a fault with it. But somehow he still ends up a 10th off Hamilton. And I think it's just a simple case that Valtteri 1.0, 2.0, 3.0 is just not faster than Hamilton. Hamilton is insanely consistent. In qualifying, he is a beast. And the fact that Bottas is just falling short is not necessarily a comment on his mindset or his focus. It's just the fact that Hamilton is faster than him. And obviously from the race, Hamilton was able to control and never really looked in any bother. Yeah. And I think that's just been the pattern for 3 years. And I don't necessarily think Mercedes are unhappy with this combination, knowing that, okay, we'll pretend to let the drivers fight in the first half of the season, but then, when crunch time happens, we're gonna shag Bottas. Hamilton is the person challenging for the title, and that's how it's gonna be. If you were to put in a driver like George Russell in that second seat, maybe Mercedes would see that as too much of a gamble in terms of the constructors' championship.
Bottas offers exactly what they want, and someone who's not good enough to challenge Hamilton, but he's still good enough to give them a second or third place regularly to give them constructors points.
I think a great amount of praise needs to be given to Lance Stroll, who's kind of been written off, even from his Williams days, as the kind of, he's being paid by his dad, therefore he can't be that good a driver. But he has had great performances in the past. His podium at Baku was a gret moment for him. And this season, he's done very well. He's outperformed Sergio Perez in the Hungarian Grand Prix, and he qualified third in the Styrian Grand Prix. Is that right?
Yeah, I think so.
He's shown some great pace, some great form, and he's not bad in on-track battles. And Sergio Perez, as I've mentioned before, is no pushover, and Lance Stroll is really holding his own.
I mean, Zach, what are your thoughts on Stroll?
I tend to agree, actually. I think he's been dealt a very hard deal on the basis of who his father is, and that's just not fair at all. When we look at Baku 2017, that was an absolutely brilliant race. Germany 2019, exactly the same. He's shown some good performances recently. Even in Hungary, he qualified very well. So, as was said, I think this is the thing with Formula One. Everyone's always concentrating on the backgrounds of the drivers, but actually we forget that you do get some drivers who they can be the pay drivers, but actually they can show that they are deserving of a Formula One seat. And I would agree, Stroll has been given a pretty harsh deal by a lot of his critics, and quite unfairly, probably just out of jealousy, really.
Mm. No, I think I'd probably agree there. Especially Baku was very, very, very impressive.
I think.
Yeah, sorry, Lawrence.
I think we should talk about a couple more drivers.
Yeah.
Alexander Albon, we have to discuss.
Yes, as I mentioned him earlier.
Yeah, I mean, I feel so bad for the guy. Last season, he's denied a podium and possible victory through, I'd say, personally, I think it was a 50-50 accident. Going around the outside of that corner, I don't feel like it was necessary.
Which race? So
Brazilian Grand Prix, sorry.
Yeah.
He was denied a podium by Hamilton, sort of punting him. And you could see his confidence really shot after that. And then at the start of this season, he's in an almost identical position on fresh tyres after a safety car with a few laps to go, sidling his way through the field, comes up behind Hamilton and goes around the outside and gets punted off again. And you can just see how his confidence is completely evaporated. And it's hard enough, as I've said, being a teammate of Verstappen without not feeling confident in your maneuvers and your pace, and being such a young driver in such a top seat. It must be so difficult for him. And I think Martin Brundle said it's at this point, when you're at your lowest point, that you just sort of have to let go of everything and just drive naturally. And I really hope that, as I said, Red Bull gives him the time and patience to do that.
No, I think you could maybe make a valid comparison between him and Valtteri Bottas, in that both of them are good drivers, but they're just probably not as fast just naturally as their teammates who are remarkable. Zack, do you have anything to add about Albon?
Well, yeah, I think he's been very unlucky. He's probably one of F1's most unluckiest drivers at the moment. I would say, though, with both instances, I think 50-50 is a fair way to describe the blame and apportion the blame. But I would say that there's also a hint of immaturity in both of those incidents as well. And I think this is where Alex Albon probably needs to realise, actually, this will go away. The inexperience aspect that's causing these accidents will disappear. So you could think of Brazil. He left the door open, and the experienced drivers would not do that, especially when you have such a tight field as it was at that particular point. And the same with the Austrian Grand Prix this year. We saw that he didn't need to go around the outside there. He could have waited a few more corners and got him on the straights. He was fast enough to get past Hamilton and didn't need to do what he did. Arguably, he could have just calmed it down, got on the straight, and used the DRS. It's an option. So I think in that respect, he is maybe the maker of his own misfortune, but he won't be the maker of his own misfortune for long. And there's been a load of bad luck in there as well. So it's a very interesting situation for him.
Fair enough. Don't think I disagree. Lawrence, do you have a dark horse for this season? Obviously, Hamilton is not really going to surprise anyone, regardless of how good his performances are. But anyone you think is going to outperform their expectations and someone to watch?
Well, I mean, we've had 3 races, so a kind of pecking order has developed. Racing Point look very solid, but with the constant question marks about the validity of their car, given that it looks exactly like last year's Mercedes. We'll remain to see what happens there. Daniel Ricciardo is a driver I wanted to highlight, a driver who knows he's moving to McLaren next season, who I think by the whole F1 world's estimation, made a mistake by moving from Red Bull to Renault. Lured in by like this sort of big project that a works team was going to bring.
Well, Renault had that kind of proposed partnership with McLaren, which was scuppered, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it's just I feel bad for the guy. The light seems to have gone out of his eyes. Do you know what I mean? Like, he looks really sad all the time, which for one of the most like
smiley man,
happy people is really sad. But you know, I really hope that he does pull some performance out the bag. It's difficult to pick out a dark horse. I mean, I guess Lando Norris. I don't really know. He was outperformed last year by Sainz, but seems to have got the hang of F1, and all the sim racing that he's done during COVID might help him. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I actually really like Norris. I think he's a great guy, and I think he's a driver I definitely root for. Do you think sorry, Lawrence, to continue, do you think that the Ricciardo and Norris McLaren partnership could yield some welcome results for the team?
Yeah, I think they're both very good drivers. Ricciardo kind of reaching or already reached his peak.
I mean, especially if they get a Mercedes engine as well, you know.
Yeah, for sure. That could definitely be a great partnership. It's just the eternal question whether they'll have the car. Lando Norris seems to be the poster boy for McLaren right now. British driver in a British team. And I think that partnership with Ricciardo might work quite well.
Fair enough. Zach, what are your thoughts on Ricciardo and Renault, or any dark horses you spot this season?
Well, on Ricciardo and Renault, I think I agree with what's been said pretty much. I don't really know what else to add. I think that was actually spot on. I think what I would potentially say as well is it shows that maybe Red Bull had just missed the gun a bit on being able to persuade him. They'd missed the chance to take that shot and really persuade him early enough. That's the only possible thing I could say. And then actually maybe an element of Ricciardo's misfortune comes from possible mismanagement of the deal that he had with Red Bull. On to other dark horses, though. I'm going to be a little bit controversial maybe here. I don't necessarily know if people will think it's controversial, but I think George Russell in the Williams. We've seen in qualifying. I'm
rooting for him as well.
We've seen it in Hungary this year and in Styria. He is good, and actually there's no reason why he couldn't get into the points this season. And if we have one Germany 2019 style race, he could be quite high up in the points. And it's pretty clear he's going to end up in the Mercedes at some point. I think I can't see how Mercedes can have invested so much into him with George delivering the results he's delivered, and he doesn't get the seat at Mercedes. So I think another real dark horse will be Russell. I mean, look, he really showed Kubica that actually he's no pushover. Kubica might have scored their only point, but Russell wasn't far behind in that race either. So, yeah, dark horse is probably Russell. You could potentially say Gasly as well. Now he's back in the AlphaTauri. Maybe the pressure's off him and he can deliver again, but it's probably a bit too early to say because he's only had half a season, really.
No, I think I agree. I mean, I'm rooting for Russell, as you say. Yeah, Lawrence.
Yeah, on Russell, I think there was an element of like because now he's kind of in the midfield battle that he's sort of been a back marker for so long. Racing and on-track battles are kind of weird for him. Like you saw on the Styrian Grand Prix, he was in 11th on like lap 4 or something, and then he sort of just overcooked it trying to overtake, and he went off the track. It's like he's just been lapped for so long. He's used to just walking out the way for other cars. Yeah, exactly. He just sort of forgot, like, oh shit, I meant to actually go for a position there, and then overcooks it.
No, I think I'm hopeful for him, and I wish him all the best. But yeah, no, thank you for kind of that preview. I'm sure we're all looking forward to the season, regardless of it being shorter. I think we'll still actually have quite a lot of action packed in, and yeah. Final thing then before we finish is I hear a lot of people say to me who aren't really into F1 as we are, who aren't people who naturally watch it. They say F1 isn't exciting because we all know that the race win is realistically between 3 or 4 drivers or fewer sometimes. And regardless of what Lawrence said about inter-team rivalry and people one-upping each other in the midfield, at the end of the day, what people really want to see is more parity across the field, and the chance that on the day of a Grand Prix you have 10 people that can realistically win this Grand Prix. I guess the question is to you then, Zack, first. Firstly, do you think that's a fair criticism or characterization? And if it is, what are the solutions?
Well, I think over the course of Formula One's history, it probably isn't fair because there have been very long periods where actually anybody could win the race, and it was not down to any driver. So, okay, I'm taking it back a little bit here, but if we go back to the 1980s, I think it was 1982 when Keke Rosberg,
yeah.
That was absolutely bizarre.
I don't think he won. I think he won it without winning a race, didn't he?
No, he won one race, I think.
One race, okay.
One race, but still, that's absolutely incredible. So I think over the course of Formula One's history, no, I don't think that's a fair criticism. In the course of the hybrid era, that probably is a fair criticism, especially since 2017 with these new gen of cars where you get all the dirty air. And I think, actually, the new regulations we're seeing in 2022 probably do fix a huge chunk of those issues. We get a budget cap, we get regulations with cars that are not going to throw dirty air into the path of other cars. So I think it's probably a fair criticism, but I think at the same time, the hybrid era is going to change now with these new rules, and I think it's going to fix the issue.
So do you genuinely think then that I think a budget cap would be very welcome in the kind of US sports style system where it leads to parity of resources, which I think is obviously very important, because we see now already that you have teams that get a lot more out with less, and I think those teams would definitely benefit from parity. The dirty air thing is welcome as well. I mean, are there other regulations that stand out to you, or are there policies you think outside the regulations that the regulations could subsume and perhaps involve?
I'd quite like to see the return of third cars for practice sessions. And they say it has to be for a junior driver. They have to be in either Formula 2 or Formula 3. Right. Just because at the end of it makes the driver market more competitive. If you can be a Formula 2 driver and get into a Formula 1 car on a Friday and you can show your skills, because that all of a sudden means that the F1 drivers need to be doing better because there'll be some hotshot who will be there to take their race seat if they are not careful. So it's an idea maybe, but at the same time you've got to balance that with the running costs. So it's an idea for sure.
Refueling?
I'm inclined to say no on that one because I think we need to be encouraging innovation in Formula One. That's partly why we get manufacturers into the sport. And if you have refueling, then the desire for efficient engines potentially goes away a little bit.
Yeah.
Whereas if there's no refueling, you have to make it to the end on the fuel you start the race with. It's forcing the teams to come up with innovative solutions to make their engines more efficient. We saw this with Mercedes in 2014, the way they split the turbocharger. It reduced the turbo lag and made sure that the engine was more efficient.
Yeah, I mean, Lawrence, what are your thoughts on these kind of reforms that could be undertaken and the initial criticism of a lack of parity and potentially offering a devil's advocate to Zack's criticism of refueling? You could say it challenges the drivers more because they have to do sprint stints, etc. I mean, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, the force behind everything that you say, Ashton, is the arguments are very compelling. I mean, I'll deal with refueling first. I think, well, it was originally taken out of the sport in the 2010,
I think, yeah.
Because it wasn't safe. There was like number of instances where like cars would catch on fire in the pit lane.
Yeah.
And that's why it's taken out. Nowadays, 10 years later, you could say that it's become much more safe. We can do it in a manageable way. And the argument that refueling does benefit the race is there. Like, it adds another element of strategy. It adds another level of excitement, for example, during like qualifying, because, you could say cars become out of position because they qualified on low fuel. And therefore at the start of the race, they'll be closer to the front, but have the disadvantage of starting on less fuel. And that sort of is quite exciting and adds a new element to the racing. But I do agree with what Zack's saying. I think the strategy is quite good as it is now with like the different tire compounds, and also we want like sort of in this sort of climate change era, we want to encourage teams to make more efficient engines, and that's something that you can get with refueling. Just going back to like the original thing from the start, yeah, exactly. I think that it is the case, and this is why a lot of, I guess, people who might be interested in F1 sort of turn off, is that when you have these races where Lewis Hamilton leads for 70 laps and then not really much happens with regards to the lead. And it's kind of perceived as boring because, oh my God, it's the same person winning every time. I think that, as I've said before in this podcast, a hierarchy is really important in a series like F1. Not just because we want to encourage teams to like be the best and develop the best cars, but also because it provides the opportunity for like great stories. Like you can tell whenever a Red Bull is leading the race, David Croft and Martin Brundle, they get more excited because it is like an unexpected result.
Feels different for them.
Yeah, and it's like it's exciting when Verstappen beats the odds in an inferior Red Bull to win like a couple races last year. I think that, as I've said, there's still this opportunity for excitement looking at the when you sort of look at the race and see drivers outperforming their cars. I do agree that the regulations coming up in the next couple years, with the budget caps especially, won't hinder the sport, will benefit it greatly, because despite what I've said, it's still important for the midfield teams to not be so far behind. We don't want, we have had a Formula 1.1 and a Formula 1.5 because midfield teams feel like they can't like break through to that podium.
Yeah, I mean, I could argue that's what we have now, where the midfield teams are in a completely different race to the front.
Yeah, exactly. But I do think it's important to keep that kind of hierarchy between cars because, it provides some great stories, and there are the midfield battle is as interesting as anything during most races, which people maybe don't concentrate on as like casual viewers, but from strategy perspectives, from just pure on-track action, if you do pay attention to an entire race, you'll find something to watch always. And that's what I really like about F1.
No, I think that's fair.
Sorry to interrupt. I was going to say as well, it gives as well an option for the younger drivers who have shown that they are capable of Formula 1 in Formula 2, the opportunity to come into Formula 1 and just develop. So as we see with George Russell and maybe Charles Leclerc in 2018. So I think that's something to add as well. You want that to an extent because it allows the drivers to develop. Because if they didn't have that opportunity, they'd go from Formula 2 either into Formula 1 and underperform, or they wouldn't get into Formula 1, which wouldn't work.
Yeah, no, fair enough. I think I agree. My dad would disagree with both of you and say that when he watched Formula 1 in the 80s with the parity and the fact that on the day you just had zero idea who's going to win the race, that was when it was better. But that might just be nostalgia. I mean, I wasn't around in the 80s, so I can't comment on how it was to watch those races live. Just finally, then, I think Zack, quick question to you would be: there's been a lot of discussion about tyres. Pirelli were asked when they came into Formula 1 to kind of make pretty shoddy tyres, actually, to some extent, just to add drama to the race, to make pit stops more common and frequent, to add that kind of extra element of strategy in the way that refueling would if you introduced it. Obviously, then there were safety concerns with the external coverings falling off and the degradation, perhaps being too severe, so that drivers couldn't really ever push the car. So what do you think is the sweet spot? And do you think that we should be looking for another manufacturer like Michelin or even a return to Bridgestone or whomever?
Well, I think the idea of having tyres that degrade and do create an element of excitement, I think is great. I agree with that. I think having tyres that last one lap, if you get the softer tyres around Spa, for example, that's pointless. That's going too far. You probably want to say you can do at least 20 laps of any given circuit with the softest tyre, and it should be okay. I do think, however, actually it would be quite good to get a second tyre manufacturer in, because again it promotes innovation and strategy and all this sort of stuff. And I'm talking from a businessman's point of view as well, but it talks about sort of, we've got to make a tyre that's exciting and lasts maybe to the minimum requirements set out by Formula One, but at the same time is exciting and gives performance to the cars. So if you have two companies in there, maybe even three, I think that would be excellent for the sport. So yeah, I'd like to see Michelin coming back. I think Bridgestone lasted a bit too well. I mean, maybe they could change that a bit, but I'd like to see a Pirelli and Michelin fight for sure. I think that'd be brilliant.
Fair enough. I mean, could I offer a devil's advocate that the last time there were kind of competing tyre manufacturers in the early 2000s, it led to kind of Ferrari having curated tyres and actually stifling competition?
Well, yes, but then maybe the argument for that is just introduce regulations saying that the tyres cannot be built for certain cars. I mean, the teams can design cars around the tyres if they want, make sure that the aerodynamics.
Yeah, I mean, that's what they do now.
Right. I think they could do that, but I see. I take the point, and it is a very valid point. But I think maybe we look at some regulations within the sporting regulations and the technical regulations potentially. Particularly technical regulations, just to try and prevent that from happening.
Fair enough. Lawrence, your thoughts on tyres?
Well, I think everyone remembers, I think it was the 2013 British Grand Prix when like 6 drivers they suffered tyre failures because I don't think the Pirelli tyres were suited or something, and they just exploded on track. And obviously it's quite hard to find the right balance between, you want the tyres to be like strong enough to withstand at least 10 or 15 laps of a Grand Prix, but you also want them to degrade, so there's an element of strategy. I think the move towards 3 tyre compounds during a race, as opposed to 2 that it was, I don't remember when the regulations changed, that was a great move because it did add like a different element of strategy to the Grand Prix. Like you could go to the hardest tyre and try and make it last like the whole Grand Prix. I think that we've moved. F1 has moved away from the early 2000s of like falling off a cliff. I think the tyres are on the side of being maybe too durable. But like we've had some great races, especially in 2018 and the start of this year, that don't necessarily rely on like this making the tires last the whole time, despite them maybe falling off the cliff. So I mean, I think the key issue, as we've mentioned again and again, is we want closer racing, and that will come when we get rid of these dirty air issues of following cars behind too closely. And overheating. So that's kind of like what I think we all want to focus on.
Okay, and I guess the very last question I want to ask you then is, Zack, if you could change one thing in Formula One, what would it be?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I think I'd probably get rid of the Friday practices.
And replace them with?
Don't replace them at all. And you have one practice session, one qualifying session, and the race. And that way, the teams don't have as long to set up. They have to have built a solid car from the ground up, and the tuning goes away. It potentially makes it more interesting as well. So, a bit controversial, but I think by now, I think a lot of my opinions have been controversial. So I might finish on a controversial one.
No, and I think that one's very compelling. As you say, makes the race more uncertain, more exciting. If maybe leads to more uncertainty in the race, just because teams will not have as much knowledge of their car's performance on a particular circuit, and maybe it will force teams to be more sustainable and productive in the way that they make their cars as well, as you say. So I think that's actually quite compelling. You can make a good case for that. Lawrence?
Well, my suggestion is that we get rid of the fucking Hanoi circuit. I mean, okay, look, I've played the F1 2020 game.
Oh yeah, it's a nightmare.
And I hate it. I hate it so much. It's not an interesting track. There's like one long
We have
straight.
Abu Dhabi, Lawrence, which isn't exactly exciting either.
Abu Dhabi, at least.
At least you can drive Abu Dhabi.
Yeah, Abu Dhabi is kind of a satisfying circuit to drive, in my opinion, because it flows quite nicely with the 2 long straights, and the final section flows quite well, in my opinion. But the fucking Hanoi circuit, the final sector is actually the most like, oh my
The
god.
last corner is horrible.
Yeah, I know, because you don't, well, you
Okay,
don't know when
can you
to put the power on.
explain to the listeners why it's horrible if they haven't played the game?
Right, so, okay, I mean, should I just take you around the whole circuit?
No, just the bits,
The most-
just the bits that are bad to you. So
It's just all of it. Like,
is it all
okay,
of it?
it's just really obtuse in terms of it's obviously a barriered circuit, so there's lots of places there's no runoff, but a lot of the corners they're just single file because there's no way to go, you know, side by side through them. And I spoke about the final sector, like it just doesn't flow well at all. It's difficult to explain. It's like it goes like left, right, left, right, left, right in the most just strange ways. I can't explain it that well. You have to experience it for yourself. It's not satisfying.
You can't really-
I would get rid of it before now.
Zach?
You can't really push on those corners because they're the sorts of corners where you want to be going flat out through them. But the problem is because of the way the barriers are set up, if you go flat out through them, you hit the wall, and it's
Yeah.
you can't push.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So they've designed the runoff areas poorly, is what you're saying.
Well,
The corners are bad. Just
Right.
I
Okay.
don't-
They don't
Yeah.
suit the area.
No, fair enough. Okay, no, that's interesting. I think one other change I would make actually is actually quite a broad change, which I think goes completely against what you two want, is that well, firstly, actually, no, two things. So, firstly, I don't like the circuit Paul Ricard. I think it's like the I think it's like slightly boring as well, and yeah, I mean, I just don't think it produces exciting races. And then my kind of big change would be I'd actually introduce more European Grand Prix, which I guess goes against the kind of global brand ideas, and that I'd resurrect, you know, Imola. I'd have, you know, as we're having this year, we're lucky going to the Algarve. I think that should become more regular. I think like the lifeblood of F1 is in Europe, and it should really focus on rebuilding some of its branding here. You know, try and make a push for terrestrial TV again in a lot of European places if it can, and you know, really engage with its fans in Europe in like classic European circuits. Like that's something I'd really enjoy. I really enjoy watching. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
I think I would agree that we should have more European races. I think Imola, Nürburgring, Algarve. I think that's just brilliant for Formula One, brilliant for motorsport fans. But I would just be saying maybe we have to be careful how we do this. So I would say get rid of races like France. It's not a great track. We'll go back to Manicourt at least. But also I'd say get rid of.
Manicourt was really good, I thought.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I've watched some of the replays and it does look like a great amount. I obviously never watched it live, but the replays have looked pretty good. But I would say get rid of tracks like Abu Dhabi, get rid of maybe even tracks like China, which are not. But I don't think they are particularly great circuits. I think when you compare them to Imola and compare them to the Algarve, they're not that great. So maybe be more judicious in either how the tracks are designed if they're not in Europe, or say, okay, we need to keep our engagement, but we need to have better tracks, and the European ones are better. So it's a tough one.
Literally, it's just any track that Herman Tilke has built can just go.
Do not use, yeah.
Just the Russian Sochi is just, oh no, I could talk about this for ages. I just hate. Look, the amount of 90-degree turns. It's not interesting. It's not interesting, guys. God.
Yeah, again, I think I mean that's an example of kind of money talking, isn't it? Really. But yeah, no, I mean, Lawrence, what are your thoughts on the kind of resurrecting the old European circuits?
Oh, I love it. As well as the F1 2020 game, I'm also a fan of this simulation game called Assetto Corsa, which allows you to sort of choose which cars to drive on certain tracks. So I'm quite a fan of Mugello, not gonna lie.
Classic.
Had a few laps around there. That sounds like a lot of fun. And obviously Algarve is quite a famous circuit. I remember Top Gear did a feature around there. That was really fun.
Yeah.
The old Top Gear, guys.
Yeah.
Top Gear.
But the
The
better
only
Top
Gear.
Gear.
I was going to say though, yeah, I mean, I agree. I mean, I was going to say, one thing I actually would like, does it make me a bad person for wanting this? Because the drivers would be in danger. Is to just release them on the entire Nürburgring, not give them like a small section off. Like, I want the drivers on the carousel. Like, I want to see a Formula One car flat out across the carousel in the Nürburgring. Does that make me a bad person?
No.
Well, I love the banking. That's why Zandvoort, I think, was a great idea. It's something different to look at, you know. I really want F1 to return to Istanbul. I thought that was a
Yeah,
great
that was a
circuit.
great circuit.
I-
Lots of overtaking.
That long left-hander is fantastic.
Mm.
Yeah, I really liked Istanbul. I wish it would return.
What was that US racetrack that they used to race at with a massive kind of oval bank?
Indianapolis.
Was it Indianapolis actually? Okay.
Yeah.
Would you
Yeah,
would you want to go there because it challenges the drivers in a different way?
Remember the 2005 Fast though?
Literally,
Oh,
yeah.
God, yeah.
Yeah.
Jordan, was it Minardi or something got on the podium? That was
Yeah,
fun.
Thiago Monteiro.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that for me that would be another interesting, just an interesting challenge to the drivers. Something
This is
new.
just all F1 fans. We just reminisce about the past because it was so much better.
All right, no, that's what we're saying though. Maybe what the 2022 regulations to sort out things and maybe revert them to how they were in the past, and maybe my father's nostalgia is not massively displaced, or misplaced rather. But yeah, anyway, Zack, Lawrence, thank you so much. Thank you so much for your time and starting this new series.
No problem.
We'll be here semi-regularly. I think before most Grand Prix, we can probably fit in at least a 30-minute preview of some kind. And yeah, we'll be here to discuss some of the interesting stories. Zack and Lawrence will kind of bring their own topic to talk about should they want to. And yeah, we hope to just keep this entertaining. And we're happy to consistently be expanding our repertoire of series on the Symposium. So yeah, thank you. Zack, Lawrence, let's say bye.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, man. This was great. I really enjoyed it. It's not often because I don't have that many friends that like F1.
Yeah.
So, I've got a lot of friends who like football and cricket, but not F1. So this is really great.
No, good. I'm happy you guys enjoyed it.
Yeah.
No worries. Cheers, guys. Please do find our bio on Instagram, the Symposium Podcast, where that links you directly to our Spotify feed. And in Spotify itself, you'll see the links to all our other podcasts, whether it's on Anchor, where we have Google Podcasts and others, or whether it's on YouTube, where we regularly update our YouTube channel with videos of our pods. You'll be able to contact us and enjoy our content in a lot of different ways. Please do subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on Spotify, follow us on Instagram, and yeah, we hope you're enjoying this series. Cheers.
The Symposium with Aulak.